Welcome back to My channel today. We're diving into a story that's sure to stir some strong emotions. Emma and Matt had the kind of marriage everyone admired, filled with love, laughter, and years of memories. But as time passed, emotional disconnect and unspoken fears began to take their toll. Things took a shocking turn when Emma formed a fleeting connection with Jason, a charming stranger who turned their world upside down. What followed was a journey through betrayal, guilt, and the messy fight to rebuild trust. This story will make you question the boundaries of love, loyalty, and forgiveness. So grab a seat, and let's unravel this emotional roller coaster together. The city hummed with life, its lights flickering against the soft embrace of the evening. In the heart of this urban jungle, tucked away on the 23rd floor of a glossy high-rise, Emma Rivers stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. She was the picture of calm confidence, at least on the outside. Her tailored blazer hung neatly over her frame, the sharp angles complementing her poised demeanor. But her reflection in the glass told a different story. Slight furrowed brows, a glimmer of hesitation in her eyes. Emma had spent the last decade building her career as a corporate attorney, climbing her way to a corner office and the respect of her peers. But that success had come at a cost. One she could feel every night when she stepped through the door of her apartment. A hollow silence, broken only by the ticking clock on the kitchen wall. Her husband, Matt, was once the vibrant center of her world. A high school teacher with an infectious passion for history, Matt had an uncanny ability to turn even the dullest topics into captivating stories. He was the grounding force to Emma's ambition, her biggest cheerleader, and her reminder to enjoy the little things in life. But over the years, something had shifted. Their once easy laughter over late-night takeout had been replaced by curt nods and distracted murmurs. At first, it was subtle. Matt stopped asking about her cases, and Emma didn't notice when Matt's stories about his students trailed off. They both seemed to orbit their own worlds, their connection thinning like an old thread threatening to snap. And then came the dinners Matt started attending alone, the last-minute cancellations from Emma, and the nights where work kept her chained to her laptop well past midnight. It wasn't that they didn't love each other anymore. At least Emma thought so. It was more like they'd forgotten how. Across town, another couple's life painted a starkly different picture. Amelia and Jason Miller were new additions to Emma and Matt's social circle. Jason, a charismatic entrepreneur with a penchant for charm, had built his career as a tech consultant. His wife, Amelia, was a freelance graphic designer who radiated warmth and creativity. They had the kind of marriage that seemed lifted from a Pinterest board, matching coffee mugs, spontaneous weekend getaways, and effortless inside jokes that made everyone else feel like outsiders. It was during a casual dinner party at the Millers' home that Emma first noticed the pull, an intangible tension that wasn't quite explainable. Jason's laughter was infectious, his attentiveness magnetic. He had a way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the only person who mattered. But his gaze lingered on Emma a moment too long, his compliments always slightly sharper when directed her way. Emma dismissed it as nothing more than charisma. Jason was naturally charming, and surely it was innocent. Yet, over the weeks that followed, Emma found herself replaying snippets of their conversations in her mind. The way Jason leaned in just slightly closer when she spoke, or how his texted follow-up, "Great seeing you tonight," was sent only to her and not in the group chat. She rationalized it. Of course, Matt was busy with a new after-school program, and Jason probably just appreciated her insights on his business expansion, but the nagging voice in her mind was hard to ignore. One Friday evening, Emma arrived home earlier than usual. The soft glow of the kitchen light spilled into the hallway, and she found Matt standing by the counter, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, startled, as though he hadn't expected her. "You're home early," he said, his tone neutral, but with a hint of surprise. "I thought we could have dinner together for once," Emma replied, setting her bag down. "Catch up." Matt hesitated before nodding, his smile faint. "Sure, let me finish this first." As the evening wore on, their conversation stayed surface level. Talk of work, a few updates on Matt's students, and a brief exchange about their weekend plans. But beneath it all was the unspoken acknowledgement that neither of them was saying what they truly felt. The following week, Jason invited Emma for coffee under the pretense of discussing a legal contract for his new startup. She agreed, convincing herself it was strictly professional. They met at a quaint cafe, the kind with vintage furniture and a handwritten chalkboard menu. Jason arrived with his signature charm, a playful grin lighting up his face. "Thanks for making time for me," he said as he pulled out a chair for her. "I know you're busy saving the corporate world." Emma chuckled, her guard already slipping. "It's just coffee, Jason. Not a life or death situation." But as the conversation flowed, the air between them shifted. They talked about more than contracts. Jason asked about her favorite books, her childhood, even her dreams outside of work. His questions weren't surface level. They were probing, laced with genuine curiosity. And Emma, despite herself, felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. By the time they parted ways, Emma's mind was a jumble of thoughts. She told herself it was harmless, a moment of connection with someone who happened to pay attention, but deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Back at home, Emma found Matt grading papers in the living room, his face lit by the glow of a desk lamp. She hesitated in the doorway, the weight of her coffee date with Jason pressing on her chest. "How was your day?" Matt asked without looking up. Emma swallowed, forcing a smile. "It was fine, just the usual." As she sat down across from him, she couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had begun. The days that followed Emma's coffee meeting with Jason seemed to pass in a strange haze. She threw herself into work, as she always did, but her thoughts had a habit of drifting. Every notification on her phone made her heart race, and her chest tightened when she realized it wasn't Jason. It wasn't as though she wanted something to happen, but the pull was undeniable. She told herself it was harmless, just a small, inconsequential spark that broke up the monotony of her days. But then came the messages. At first, they were infrequent. Quick questions about work or light-hearted jokes referencing their shared interests. Over time, though, they became something more. Jason started asking questions that felt too intimate. What was her happiest memory? What did she think her life would look like in 10 years? These weren't questions friends or even acquaintances asked casually. And yet, Emma found herself answering them, her replies increasingly vulnerable. Meanwhile, things at home weren't improving. Matt had thrown himself even further into his schoolwork, organizing field trips, mentoring students, and spending long evenings at the school. When he was home, the silence between him and Emma grew heavier. On more than one occasion, she thought about bringing up her feelings, her loneliness, the nagging ache that something was missing, but she couldn't find the words. Matt seemed so content in his routine, and Emma wasn't sure she wanted to disrupt it. The tipping point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Emma sat in her car, parked outside their apartment complex, her phone buzzing incessantly on the passenger seat. Jason's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Hey," she answered, her voice quieter than she'd intended. "Hey yourself." Jason's voice was warm, tinged with something Emma couldn't quite place. "I was wondering if you'd want to grab a drink tonight, just us, nothing too serious." Emma hesitated, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. She should have said no. She knew that. But the idea of sitting in the apartment, eating dinner in silence while Matt worked at the dining table, felt unbearable. Sure," she replied, before she could second-guess herself. "Where should we meet?" An hour later, Emma found herself sitting across from Jason in a dimly lit bar downtown. The space was small and cozy, with soft jazz playing in the background and candles flickering on the tables. Jason greeted her with his usual easy smile, his confidence as disarming as ever. "You look like you've had a long day," he said, sliding a drink toward her. Emma exhaled, the weight of her week settling on her shoulders. "You have no idea." As the evening wore on, the line between casual conversation and something deeper began to blur. Jason leaned in close, his gaze locked on hers as he recounted a story from his childhood. Emma found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in weeks. The world outside the bar faded away, leaving just the two of them in their own little bubble. But then Jason reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. Emma froze, the reality of what was happening crashing down around her. "This feels nice," Jason said softly, his voice barely audible over the music. "Doesn't it?" Emma pulled her hand back, her heart pounding in her chest. I should go." Jason didn't push, but the look in his eyes as she stood up and grabbed her coat lingered in her mind long after she left the bar. When Emma returned home that night, Matt was still awake, grading papers at the dining table. He looked up as she walked in, his expression a mix of surprise and relief. "Late night?" he asked, his tone light but probing. "Work," Emma lied, setting her bag down. "It's been crazy." Matt nodded, but Emma could tell he didn't believe her. He didn't press, though, and Emma was grateful she didn't have the energy to explain, especially not when she didn't fully understand it herself. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. Emma avoided Jason's messages, hoping the distance would help her regain clarity. But the tension at home only grew. Matt seemed more distant than ever. His attempts to connect with Emma met with half-hearted responses. Emma knew she was pulling away, but she didn't know how to stop. One evening, as Emma sat alone in the living room scrolling through her phone, she came across a photo of Matt and his students on a field trip. They were standing in front of a museum, their faces lit with excitement. Matt stood in the middle, his arms slung around a student's shoulders, his grin as wide as she'd ever seen it. Something in that image struck Emma. She realized she couldn't remember the last time Matt had smiled at her like that. It wasn't just Matt who'd changed, it was her, too. She'd let the pressures of work and life chip away at their relationship, piece by piece, until all that remained was a fragile shell. And then there was Jason. The thought of him still lingered in the back of her mind, but now it felt less like a spark and more like a warning. Emma knew she needed to make a choice, to address the cracks in her marriage head-on or risk losing everything. But as much as Emma wanted to fight for her marriage, she wasn't sure if it was too late. Before we dive deeper into this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts so far. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think of Emma's journey. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel so you never miss out on more stories like this. Your support means the world to me. The day Emma had been dreading finally arrived. It wasn't one singular moment that broke her, but a slow cascade of small cracks. That morning, Matt had kissed her on the forehead before leaving for work, a gesture so routine it felt hollow. The touch was familiar, but the emotion behind it was absent, like the echoes of a melody long forgotten. Emma had planned to use the weekend to reconnect with Matt. She had even made a reservation at their favorite restaurant, hoping a familiar setting might reignite their spark. But as the day wore on, Jason's texts continued to buzz on her phone. At first, she ignored them, determined to stay focused on repairing the fractures in her marriage. But then, one message caught her eye. "I need to see you tonight." Emma stared at the screen, her heart racing. She knew she should delete it, block Jason, and never look back. But curiosity, or was it something deeper, got the better of her. Her fingers hovered over her phone, wavering between obligation and temptation. That evening, Emma sat across from Jason once again, the dim lighting of the bar cloaking them in an unspoken intimacy. She hadn't planned to meet him, but her resolve crumbled the moment she stepped into the elevator of her apartment, picturing yet another quiet dinner with Matt. "You seem distracted," Jason said, his voice low, his eyes scanning her face with concern. "I shouldn't be here," Emma replied, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and defiance. "This is wrong." Jason leaned forward, his expression softening. "Emma, I don't want to make your life harder, but I can't ignore how I feel about you." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emma's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She wanted to push him away, to tell him to leave her alone, but the truth was she didn't want him to stop. Jason represented something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of being wanted, seen, and desired. Meanwhile, Matt sat alone at their dining table, his plate untouched. He had spent the day preparing for the weekend trip he hoped would bridge the growing distance between him and Emma. But as the hours ticked by and her seat remained empty, a gnawing suspicion took root in his mind. Matt wasn't naive. He'd noticed the changes in Emma, her distracted glances, her late nights, the way she flinched whenever her phone buzzed. He had chalked it up to stress at first, but now doubt clouded his thoughts. He picked up his phone and stared at her name in his contacts, his thumb hovering over the call button. But something held him back. Maybe it was fear. Fear of confirming what he already suspected. The breaking point came 2 days later. Matt had left early for a conference, leaving Emma alone in the apartment. She spent the morning pacing, her thoughts a tangled mess of regret, guilt, and longing. Jason's text still lingered on her phone, a reminder of the line she was dangerously close to crossing. It was mid-afternoon when Emma's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Jason standing there, his expression a mix of determination and vulnerability. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before she could protest. Emma's heart pounded as she closed the door behind him. "Jason, you can't just show up here." "I know," he said, his voice steady. "But I can't keep pretending this doesn't mean something." Jason reached for her hand, and for a brief moment, Emma let him. His touch was warm, grounding her in a way that felt both comforting and terrifying. But as his fingers tightened around hers, a wave of clarity washed over her. She pulled away, her eyes filling with tears. "This has to stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't do this to Matt." Jason stepped back, his jaw tightening. "What about what you want, Emma? Doesn't that matter?" Emma shook her head, her tears spilling over. "Not if it means destroying everything I've built." Jason looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "If that's what you want, I'll respect it." As he left, Emma sank to the floor, her sobs echoing in the empty apartment. But the story didn't end there. Jason's departure wasn't the resolution Emma hoped for. The emotional chasm between her and Matt remained, and the weight of her almost affair loomed over her like a storm cloud. Matt's growing suspicions finally boiled over during dinner the following week. They sat across from each other in silence, the clink of silverware the only sound between them. Finally, Matt set down his fork and looked at Emma, his eyes weary. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with pain. Emma froze, her stomach churning. "What do you mean?" Matt leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You've been distant for months. Your phone never stops buzzing, and you flinch every time I try to talk to you. If there's something I should know, now's the time to say it." Emma's throat tightened, her mind racing. She could deny it, deflect, and hope Matt would let it go, but the look in his eyes told her he wouldn't. She began, her voice trembling. "I haven't been honest with you." Matt's face fell, the color draining from his cheeks. "What are you saying, Emma?" "I haven't done anything," she said quickly, desperate to soften the blow. "But there's someone I've been talking to. It never went beyond that, I swear." Matt sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Why?" The single word cut through Emma like a blade. She wanted to explain, to tell him about the loneliness, the disconnect, and the way Jason had made her feel alive again, but all she could say was, "I don't know." Matt stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." Emma watched helplessly as he grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in Emma and Matt's marriage became impossible to ignore. They tried to rebuild, attending therapy and spending more time together, but the weight of Emma's confession lingered, casting a shadow over every conversation and every shared moment. Jason, meanwhile, faded into the background, his presence a distant memory. Emma deleted his number and blocked him on social media, determined to focus on salvaging what was left of her marriage. But the road to redemption was far from easy. One evening, as Emma and Matt sat on the couch watching a movie, Matt turned to her, his expression pained. "Do you still love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's heart broke at the vulnerability in his tone. "Of course I do," she said, her voice firm. "I've never stopped." Matt nodded, but the doubt in his eyes remained. "Then why did it take losing me to make you realize that?" Emma didn't have an answer. All she could do was take his hand in hers and promise to do better, to fight for the love they'd almost lost. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Relationships are complicated, and love isn't always enough to keep two people together. Emma and Matt's journey isn't over, but one thing is clear. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. What do you think? Can Emma and Matt find their way back to each other? Or is their marriage too far gone? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your thoughts mean everything to me. Weeks passed, but the tension between Emma and Matt refused to fade. It lingered like an unwelcome guest in their home, tainting every interaction and making even the simplest conversations feel strained. They were going through the motions, therapy sessions, dinner dates, even a weekend trip to the countryside, but the connection that once held them together seemed just out of reach. The final blow came on an otherwise ordinary evening. Emma was cooking dinner while Matt scrolled through his phone at the kitchen table. The soft hum of the news on the television filled the room, a mundane backdrop to their increasingly fragile dynamic. "Emma," Matt said suddenly, his voice sharper than usual. She turned, a wooden spoon in hand. "What is it?" Matt held up his phone, his expression cold. On the screen was a photo of Emma and Jason, taken at the bar during one of their meetings. The angle was grainy, but the image was unmistakable. Jason leaning in, Emma's face turned toward his, their proximity far too close to be innocent. "What is this?" Matt asked, his voice low but laced with anger. Emma's stomach dropped. She recognized the photo immediately, though she had no idea how Matt had found it. "Matt, I can explain—" "Explain?" he interrupted, standing abruptly. "Explain how you told me it was just text and nothing more. Explain why you were meeting him alone or why you didn't think to mention this." Emma's hand shook as she set the spoon down. "I wasn't hiding it, I didn't want to make things worse." Matt laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the room like a knife. "You didn't want to make things worse, Emma. Do you even hear yourself? This isn't just some small misunderstanding. You lied to me again." "I didn't lie," Emma insisted, though her voice wavered. "It was nothing, Matt. It never went anywhere." "But it could have," Matt shot back, his voice rising. "And you were willing to risk everything we built for nothing. Do you even care what this has done to us?" Emma felt tears welling in her eyes, but she forced them back. "Of course I care. I've been trying. Matt, I've been trying to fix this." Matt shook his head, his expression unreadable. "You don't fix a marriage by running to someone else when things get hard." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Emma wanted to say something, anything, to make Matt understand. But what could she say? The truth was, she didn't have an excuse, only regrets. Finally, Matt grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "I need some time to think," he said, his voice calmer but no less resolute. "I'll be staying at a friend's for a while." Emma didn't try to stop him as he walked out the door, the sound of it closing behind him echoing in her ears. The days without Matt were some of the loneliest Emma had ever experienced. She stayed busy with work, but the empty apartment felt colder and quieter than ever. Therapy appointments became a solo endeavor, and each session left her more acutely aware of the damage she'd caused. Meanwhile, Matt found refuge at his friend Tyler's house. Tyler, who had been Matt's college roommate and confidant for years, offered a listening ear and a place to stay without judgment. But even Tyler's presence couldn't ease the ache in Matt's chest. "You're still in love with her," Tyler said one night as they sat on the back porch, beers in hand. Matt didn't deny it. "Of course I am. That's what makes this so damn hard." Tyler nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Love's messy, man, but you have to figure out if it's worth fighting for." Matt sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's the thing, I don't know if I can trust her again." "You don't have to decide tonight," Tyler said, clapping him on the shoulder. "But don't let fear make the choice for you." As the weeks dragged on, Emma and Matt exchanged only a handful of texts, mostly logistical updates about bills and shared responsibilities. The distance between them felt insurmountable, and Emma began to fear that she'd already lost him for good. It wasn't until their therapist suggested a joint session that Emma saw Matt again. The sight of him walking into the room, his shoulders tense, his face unreadable, sent a jolt through her chest. She wanted to run to him, to beg him to come home, but she knew it wasn't that simple. The session was tense at first, each of them skirting around the issues that had brought them there, but as the hour wore on, the walls they'd built around themselves began to crack. "I felt invisible," Emma admitted, her voice breaking. "I felt like you didn't see me anymore." Matt's jaw tightened. "And I felt like I wasn't enough for you, like nothing I did could make you happy." Their therapist leaned forward, her expression gentle. "It sounds like you've both been carrying a lot of pain, but instead of sharing it with each other, you've been carrying it alone." Emma glanced at Matt, her eyes searching his. "I want to fix this, Matt. I really do. But I can't do it without you." Matt looked away, his expression conflicted. "I don't know if I can forget what happened, Emma, but I also don't know if I'm ready to let you go." It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Emma sat alone on the couch, her mind replaying the session. She knew rebuilding their marriage would take time, patience, and trust, things they'd both struggled to give each other. But for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Just as she was about to head to bed, her phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up, half expecting another message from Jason. But it wasn't him. It was Matt. "I'm not ready to come home," the message read, "but I think I'm ready to try." Emma stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. The air between Emma and Matt was still fragile, like a glass balancing precariously on the edge of a table. They started spending time together again, short walks in the park, dinners that ended with hesitant smiles. But the tension simmered just below the surface. Every word felt weighted, every glance measured, as if they were both waiting for the other to crack the silence with the truth they were too afraid to voice. Emma was the first to make a bold move one evening. As they sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant, she reached into her bag and pulled out a letter. Her hands trembled as she slid it across the table. "What's this?" Matt asked, his brow furrowing. "It's everything," Emma said softly. "Everything I should have said, but didn't know how." Matt hesitated before picking it up, his eyes scanning the handwritten words. The letter detailed Emma's feelings of isolation, her regret over Jason, and her desperate desire to rebuild their relationship. By the time Matt finished reading, his eyes were glossy, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Say that you'll keep trying," Emma said, her tone pleading, "that we'll keep trying." Matt set the letter down and nodded slowly. "Okay, let's try." But trying wasn't enough to erase the cracks. While Emma was determined to make amends, Matt was still grappling with his own insecurities. The image of Emma and Jason together haunted him, and though he didn't voice it, the doubt gnawed at him in quiet moments. One night, as they watched a documentary on the couch, Matt blurted out a question that had been eating away at him for weeks. "Did you love him?" Emma froze, her heart pounding. She turned to face him, her expression pained. "Matt, no, it was never about that." "Then what was it about?" Matt asked, his voice rising. "Because I've been tearing myself apart trying to figure out what I did wrong." Emma placed a hand on his arm, her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't you, Matt. It was me. I felt lost, like I was disappearing into my own life. And Jason, he made me feel seen, but it was never real, not like us." Matt looked away, his jaw tightening. "I want to believe you, but it's hard, Emma. It's really hard." The breakthrough came during a tense therapy session a week later. Their therapist asked them to write down their biggest fear about the future of their marriage and share it with each other. Emma went first. "I'm afraid that no matter how hard I try, I'll never be able to fix what I broke," she admitted, her voice trembling. Matt was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. "I'm afraid I'll never be enough for you." The weight of his words hit Emma like a freight train. She realized in that moment how deeply her actions had hurt him, not just because of the betrayal, but because they had confirmed his worst fears. She reached for his hand, her grip firm. "You are enough, Matt," she said, her voice resolute. You've always been enough, I just forgot how to see it. But I won't forget again. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments of progress, long conversations that stretched into the night, shared laughter over inside jokes, and quiet evenings spent rediscovering the small joys of their relationship. But there were setbacks too, arguments that flared up unexpectedly, triggered by lingering pain and unresolved anger. The true test of their commitment came during a weekend retreat organized by their therapist. The retreat was designed to help couples rebuild trust, and while Emma was eager to attend, Matt was reluctant. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he admitted as they packed their bags. You don't have to be ready, Emma said, placing a hand on his cheek. You just have to be willing. The retreat proved to be both challenging and cathartic. One exercise required Emma and Matt to sit face to face and share their rawest emotions without interruption. At first, the silence between them was deafening, but slowly, the words began to flow. I hated you for what you did, Matt confessed, his voice shaking. I hated that you turned to someone else instead of me. Emma's tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. And I hated myself for hurting you, for letting my own insecurities drive a wedge between us. By the end of the exercise, both of them were emotionally drained, but something had shifted. For the first time in months, they felt like they were on the same side, facing the pain together instead of letting it pull them apart. The climax of their journey came on the final night of the retreat. Each couple was asked to write a letter to their partner, expressing their hopes for the future. Emma poured her heart into hers, her words flowing freely onto the page. When it was Matt's turn to read his letter aloud, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. Emma, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget what happened, but I know I don't want to live without you. I want to believe in us again. And I think I can. Emma's heart swelled as she listened to his words. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a promise to keep fighting for each other, no matter how hard it got. As they drove home from the retreat, the air between them felt lighter. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt hopeful. You know, Matt said with a small smile, I think we might just make it. Emma reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. I think so too. As Emma and Matt settled back into their lives after the retreat, it was clear that they were standing on the precipice of something new. The routines that once felt monotonous now carried a sense of cautious hope. Yet, both knew that their reconciliation was fragile, a seedling in a storm, needing constant care to survive. One evening, as they sat on the couch flipping through an old photo album, Emma came across a picture from their early years. They were at a picnic, Matt laughing with his head thrown back, Emma leaning into him with a carefree smile. The joy in their faces was palpable, a stark contrast to the tension they had recently endured. Do you remember this day? Emma asked, her fingers tracing the edges of the photo. Matt smiled faintly. Yeah, you made that terrible potato salad, and I pretended to like it because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. Emma laughed, the sound breaking the heaviness in the room. It was awful, wasn't it? The worst, Matt said, chuckling. But it didn't matter, I just wanted to be with you. His words hung in the air, unspoken, but understood. Emma reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I miss that version of us. Matt's gaze softened. Me too. But maybe we can find a new version, one that's stronger. The weeks that followed were a testament to their commitment. They began planning small date nights, cooking meals together, and making time for the conversations they had once avoided. But not every moment was easy. The scars of their past still lingered, and occasionally, old wounds reopened. One such moment came when Emma received an unexpected email from Jason. The subject line read, Closure. Emma's heart raced as she opened it, her mind torn between curiosity and dread. The message was brief, apologetic. Jason wrote that he had moved on but wanted to acknowledge his role in the pain she had caused Matt. He wished her well and promised not to reach out again. Emma sat staring at the email, unsure whether to tell Matt. She knew transparency was essential, but she also feared how he would react. That evening, over dinner, Emma decided to come clean. I got an email from Jason today, she said, her voice steady but cautious. Matt's fork paused midway to his mouth, his expression hardening. What did he want? To apologize, Emma said quickly. He said he's moved on and won't contact me again. I thought you should know. Matt's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Thanks for telling me. Emma reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I didn't reply. I don't want to. Matt looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. I appreciate that, Emma. I really do. Despite the small victories, their journey toward healing hit another roadblock when Matt's school organized a fundraiser dinner. The event was a formal affair, bringing together teachers, parents, and community leaders. Emma accompanied Matt, determined to support him. But the evening took an unexpected turn when an acquaintance of Jason's approached them. Emma, it's been a while, the man said, his tone overly familiar. How's Jason? Matt's entire demeanor shifted, his previously warm expression turning icy. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she stammered out a response. I wouldn't know, she said firmly. We're not in contact. The man nodded, clearly oblivious to the tension he'd caused. Well, I'll tell him you said hello if I see him. As he walked away, Matt turned to Emma, his face a mixture of anger and hurt. Why does it feel like his shadow is still following us? Emma's chest tightened. Matt, I didn't know he'd be brought up tonight. I had no control over that. Matt sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know it feels like no matter how hard we try, he's still there. Emma stepped closer, her voice soft but resolute. He's not, Matt. He's gone, and I'm here with you. Matt nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. I just want to get past this, Emma. I want to stop feeling like there's a ghost in the room. So do I, Emma said, wrapping her arms around him. And we will together. The turning point finally came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Emma and Matt had spent the morning gardening, a new hobby they'd taken up as part of their effort to reconnect. As they sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and admiring their handiwork, Emma turned to Matt with a determined expression. I want us to write new vows, she said. Matt raised an eyebrow. Vows? Yeah, Emma said, her tone earnest. We've been through so much, and I think it's time we make new promises to each other, ones that reflect where we are now. Matt considered her words before nodding. Okay, let's do it. The following week, they stood in their backyard, surrounded by the flowers they had planted together. It was just the two of them, no guests, no distractions, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Emma went first. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were filled with conviction. Matt, I promise to never take you for granted again, to communicate, to listen, and to fight for us, even when it's hard. You are my heart, my home, and my greatest love. Matt's eyes glistened as he took her hands. Emma, I promise to trust you again, to believe in us, and to let go of the pain we've carried. You are my partner, my anchor, and the love of my life. As they exchanged their vows, the weight of their past seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of renewal and hope. It wasn't a perfect resolution, healing never is, but it was a beginning. And for Emma and Matt, that was enough, and that's the end of this chapter in Emma and Matt's story. Life isn't a fairy tale, and love isn't always easy, but with effort, honesty, and a little bit of faith, even the most fractured relationships can find their way back to solid ground. What do you think? Could Emma and Matt's story have ended differently? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your thoughts mean the world to me. After exchanging their new vows, Emma and Matt experienced a fleeting sense of peace. The ceremony, intimate and heartfelt, had marked a turning point in their relationship, but the challenges of moving forward were far from over. They both knew that rebuilding their trust required more than words. It needed consistent action, honesty, and patience. Emma had started journaling again, a practice she'd abandoned years ago. It became her way of processing the complicated emotions that still surfaced, especially on days when the weight of her past decisions threatened to overwhelm her. Matt, on the other hand, found solace in running. Each mile he ran felt like shedding a layer of doubt, frustration, and hurt. One evening, after Matt returned from a long run, Emma approached him with an idea. "I was thinking," she began hesitantly, "maybe we should plan a trip together, just us somewhere we can leave everything behind for a little while." Matt wiped the sweat from his forehead, considering her suggestion. "A trip, huh? Where are you thinking?" "Does it matter?" Emma said with a small smile. "As long as it's us and we're not worrying about work or therapy or anything else?" Matt nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think that could be good." The following weekend, they packed their bags and set off for a remote cabin in the mountains. The drive was long, winding through dense forests and past glittering streams, but the stillness of the landscape mirrored the calm Emma and Matt hoped to find. The first evening at the cabin was quiet. They cooked dinner together, something simple yet satisfying, and sat on the porch watching the stars. The silence between them felt different now, less charged and more reflective. It was as though they were learning to be in each other's presence again without the burden of unspoken tension. By the second day, they had settled into a rhythm. They hiked, explored hidden trails, and even laughed over a failed attempt at fishing in a nearby lake. The cabin, with its rustic charm and lack of cell service, became a sanctuary where they could focus on each other without distractions. But even in this serene setting, the shadows of their past weren't far behind. On the third evening, a storm rolled in, bringing with it a heavy downpour that rattled the cabin's tin roof. Emma and Matt sat by the fireplace, a bottle of wine between them. The flickering flames cast long shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere both cozy and introspective. "Do you ever think about what could have happened if we hadn't caught ourselves in time?" Matt asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the crackling firewood. Emma set her glass down, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" Matt looked into the flames, his expression pensive. "I mean, if we'd let things go too far, if we hadn't tried to fix this." Emma swallowed hard. "I think about it all the time, and it scares me." Matt turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Why didn't you tell me you felt so disconnected back then? Why did it take someone else for you to realize what we had was worth saving?" Emma's chest tightened, her guilt bubbling to the surface. "Because I was scared I didn't know how to tell you that I felt invisible, without making it sound like it was your fault. And then Jason came along, and it felt like an escape, a way to feel seen without facing what was really wrong." Matt nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I hated him. You know I hated the idea of him, but what scared me more was the thought that you might have been happier with him." Emma reached for his hand, her touch firm but gentle. "I wouldn't have been. It wasn't real, Matt. It was a distraction. What's real is this. Us." The vulnerability in her voice seemed to soften Matt's resolve. He squeezed her hand, his grip anchoring her in the moment. "I believe you," he said finally. "I just need time." The storm passed by morning, leaving the air crisp and the sky a vivid shade of blue. Emma and Matt ventured outside, the ground still damp from the rain. They spent the day exploring a nearby meadow, the wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. The simplicity of their surroundings seemed to mirror the simplicity they were trying to rediscover in their relationship. That evening, as they watched the sunset from the cabin's porch, Matt broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be the same?" he asked. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft but steady. "I don't think we'll ever be the same, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we can be something better." Matt wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "I'd like that." Their return to the city marked the beginning of a new chapter. While the retreat had provided a brief escape, the real work of rebuilding their marriage began the moment they stepped back into their everyday lives. Therapy sessions resumed, along with the responsibilities of work and home. But Emma and Matt approached each challenge with a renewed sense of partnership. They also began to rediscover the joys they'd once shared. Sunday mornings became their time. Pancake breakfasts, long walks, and lazy afternoons spent reading or watching movies. It was a ritual that reminded them of the simple pleasures they'd overlooked in the chaos of their lives. But not every day was perfect. There were still moments of doubt, frustration, and fear. Emma struggled with the lingering guilt of her past mistakes, while Matt wrestled with his insecurities. Yet, through it all, they continued to choose each other. One evening, as they sat on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between them, Emma turned to Matt with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting for this?" she asked. Matt smiled, his eyes warm. "I hope not, because if we're fighting, it means we still care." Emma nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I care more than you'll ever know." Matt leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Me too." Emma and Matt's story isn't a perfect one. Far from it, but that's what makes it real. Love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about owning them, learning from them, and choosing to stay even when it's hard. What do you think can love truly overcome the deepest of betrayals? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. As the weeks turned into months, Emma and Matt settled into a cautious rhythm. While they had made significant progress, the weight of their past still hung over them like a dark cloud, ready to burst at the slightest provocation. Both knew that healing wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks, but the effort to move forward required more patience than either had anticipated. One Friday evening, after a long week of work, Emma suggested they have a game night at home. "It's been a while since we just had fun," she said with a hopeful smile. Matt hesitated, but eventually agreed, and soon the living room table was covered in board games, snacks, and a bottle of wine. They started with a simple card game, laughter breaking through the usual silence as they competed playfully. For the first time in ages, Emma saw the Matt she fell in love with, the one who teased her about silly mistakes and celebrated his victories with exaggerated enthusiasm. But just as the evening seemed to reach a high point, Matt's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his smile fading as he saw a message from an old friend. "Everything okay?" Emma asked, her tone cautious. "Yeah," Matt said, setting the phone down. But the lightness of the evening was gone, replaced by a subtle tension Emma could feel in the air. She didn't press him, though her curiosity lingered. The next morning, Matt sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the message. It was from Tyler, the friend he had stayed with during their separation. "How's everything going with Emma? Hope she's proving it's worth it." The words struck a nerve, reopening doubts Matt thought he had put to rest. Later that day, as he and Emma prepared for a dinner with friends, Matt's unease boiled over. "Do you think we're forcing this?" he asked suddenly, his voice low but firm. Emma paused, her hands tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we're trying so hard to fix things that we're ignoring the possibility that we might not work anymore?" The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of shock and hurt. "You think this is all for nothing?" Matt shook his head, his face conflicted. "No, sometimes I wonder if we're clinging to something that's already broken." Emma's chest tightened, her pulse racing. "Matt, I know I hurt you, and I know this hasn't been easy, but I thought we were finally getting somewhere." "We are," Matt said, his voice softening. "But that doesn't mean the fear goes away." Emma stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm afraid too, every day. But if we let that fear control us, we'll never make it." Matt met her gaze, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I just don't want us to waste more time if this isn't real." Emma took his hand, her grip firm. "It is real, and it's worth fighting for." Despite the confrontation, they went to the dinner, determined not to let their emotions derail the evening. But as the night wore on, the unspoken tension between them became harder to ignore. It was during dessert that one of their friends, Sarah, brought up the topic of trust in relationships. "You know," Sarah said, swirling her wine glass, "the hardest thing isn't forgiving someone. It's trusting them again." Emma felt her stomach drop, her cheeks burning as the conversation turned uncomfortably personal. She glanced at Matt, whose jaw tightened as he stared at his plate. "What do you think, Matt?" Sarah pressed, oblivious to the growing tension. Is trust something you can rebuild? Matt looked up, his gaze sharp but controlled. I think trust takes time and effort, but it's not impossible. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it gently. He didn't pull away, but the strain in his expression was clear. The drive home was silent, the tension from the evening still palpable. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Emma couldn't hold it in any longer. I hate that people know, she said, her voice breaking. I hate that every time we're in a room, it feels like there's this elephant sitting between us. Matt sighed, leaning his head back against the seat. I hate it too, but we can't change what happened. Emma turned to him, her eyes glistening with tears. Then how do we move past it? Matt looked at her, his expression softening. One step at a time. The following week brought an unexpected challenge. Matt's school announced a mentorship program, and he was assigned a student named Lily, a bright, ambitious senior who reminded him of why he loved teaching. But as he became more involved in the program, his time with Emma began to dwindle. Emma noticed the shift almost immediately. Matt came home later, his attention divided, and their shared moments grew fewer and farther between. While she admired his dedication, the growing distance brought back old insecurities. One evening, as Matt sat grading papers at the kitchen table, Emma approached him cautiously. Do you have time to talk? She asked. Matt glanced up, his expression distracted. Can it wait? I'm swamped. Emma hesitated before nodding, retreating to the living room. But as she sat there, the familiar ache of being sidelined crept in. The breaking point came a week later. Emma had planned a special dinner to celebrate Matt's upcoming mentorship award, but when he arrived home, he barely acknowledged the effort. This looks great, he said absently, setting his bag down, but I've got a lot of prep to do for tomorrow's meeting. Emma stared at him, her heart sinking. Matt, I just wanted us to have a moment together. Matt sighed, rubbing his temples. Emma, I appreciate it, I do, but I can't just drop everything right now. The frustration that had been building inside Emma finally erupted. You're doing it again, she said, her voice rising, pushing me aside like I don't matter. Matt's eyes widened, his own temper flaring. Are you serious after everything we've been through? You think I don't care? It's not about caring, Matt, Emma shot back. It's about making me feel like I'm a priority. The argument spiraled from there, both of them voicing years of pent-up resentment and frustration. By the end of it, they were left standing on opposite sides of the room, their breathing heavy, their emotions raw. And that's where we'll leave it for now. The stakes have never been higher for Emma and Matt, and the choices they make next will define their future. Will they find a way to bridge the gap, or will the weight of their past prove too much to bear? What do you think? Can Emma and Matt overcome this final hurdle? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive. The argument that night marked a turning point for Emma and Matt. The silence that followed was deafening, each retreating to their corners of the house, the weight of unspoken fears and frustrations pressing down on them. Emma sat in the living room, staring blankly at the darkened television screen, while Matt paced the bedroom, his mind racing. Both of them knew that this was a moment of reckoning. The fragile threads holding their relationship together were stretched to their limit, and the choices they made now would determine whether they could rebuild or if it was time to let go. The next morning, Emma woke to find Matt sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his expression weary but resolute. We need to talk, he said simply. Emma nodded, sitting down across from him. I know. For the next hour, they laid everything on the table. Emma admitted her lingering guilt over her mistakes, her fear of never being able to make things right, and her struggle to trust herself again. Matt shared his own insecurities, the fear that he wasn't enough, that he might never fully forgive Emma, and that the effort to rebuild might be too much for both of them. But as they talked, something shifted. Instead of blaming or accusing, they listened. They heard each other in a way they hadn't in years, and for the first time, their pain felt shared rather than isolating. That weekend, they decided to take another small trip, this time to the beach where they had spent their honeymoon years earlier. The ocean air was crisp, the waves crashing against the shore as they walked side by side. It wasn't an escape, but a chance to reflect on how far they'd come. Sitting on a blanket with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Matt turned to Emma. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" he asked. Emma smiled faintly. "I said I'd love you even when it was hard." Matt nodded, his gaze steady. "And I promised to fight for you. For us, I think somewhere along the way, we both forgot those promises." Emma reached for his hand, her grip firm. "But we're remembering now, and that's what matters." Matt squeezed her hand, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, it is." Returning home, they found themselves approaching their life with a renewed sense of purpose. Emma made an effort to show her appreciation for Matt's work, attending his mentorship award ceremony and cheering him on from the front row. Matt, in turn, became more intentional about carving out time for their relationship, ensuring that their shared moments weren't overshadowed by work or distractions. But perhaps the most significant change was their commitment to honesty. No more hiding, no more skirting around difficult topics. They faced their fears and doubts head-on, even when it hurt. One evening, as they sat on the couch flipping through photos from their beach trip, Matt said something that took Emma by surprise. "I forgive you," he said softly, his voice steady. Emma's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears. "Matt, I'm not saying it's easy," he continued, "or that I don't still have moments where I struggle, but I don't want to carry this weight anymore. I want to move forward with you." Emma nodded, her tears spilling over as she leaned into him. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Matt wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Thank you for fighting for it." The final chapter of Emma and Matt's story wasn't perfect, because life isn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, arguments that flared up unexpectedly, and days when the weight of their past threatened to resurface. But they faced those challenges together, choosing each other again and again. In time, the scars of their past began to fade, replaced by new memories and a deeper understanding of what it meant to love unconditionally. They found joy in the small things: Sunday morning pancakes, late-night movie marathons, and quiet walks through the park. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but embracing the lessons it had taught them. Years later, as they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a small gathering of friends and family, Emma looked at Matt across the room and felt a surge of gratitude. They had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more connected than ever. And in that moment, she knew that every tear, every difficult conversation, and every moment of doubt had been worth it. Emma and Matt's story reminds us that love isn't always easy. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes downright painful, but it's also resilient, transformative, and capable of enduring even the deepest wounds when both people are willing to fight for it. So, what do you think? Could you see yourself fighting for love like Emma and Matt did? Or do you think some things are too broken to mend? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more with you soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This concludes Emma and Matt's journey, bringing their story full circle while showing that healing, though challenging, is always possible with love and effort.